Deion Sanders has made really no qualms about how he's going to build his roster and how he has built his roster. When he got to Colorado, he told players, you're probably going to want to get in the portal. Either you're not going to be good enough to play here, or if you will stick around, we're going to bring in kids from the transfer portal. There's a decent chance they're going to be better than you. You guys went 2-10 last year. We're going to do everything we can to upgrade the roster as fast as possible. And so in turn, I think it was 78 kids, something like that got either swapped through the transfer portal or to the transfer portal from Colorado. And the Athletic had a really good story on where all of the players that transferred out of Colorado ended up. And some of them were community college JUCO guys. Some guys went to Division II, FCS, other Power 5 programs. It was a really interesting look at where they all ended up. But there was one specific individual who talked about, hey, basically, like, I understood where Deion Sanders was coming from, right? That, they brought me in to turn around the program, that they brought me in to turn this thing around from 2-10 to a winning culture, excite the fan base, all of those things. His name was Xavier Smith. And Xavier Smith told The Athletic that he said, basically Deion Sanders never tried to get to know me. And that was the frustrating part, was that he was telling people, like, you suck, you're not very good, which I'm not going to sit here and say, Deion Sanders is a jerk or anything like that for being upfront and honest with kids. Now, I do think there's some criticism there that he told all these kids to get out of the program and get in the portal because he was going to bring in Louis. He was going to bring in creme de la creme. And then when those guys decided, hey, you know what, this actually isn't working out for me, and they left, and he was like, well, they weren't that good anyway. Okay, well, now you're kind of into not cool territory. But Xavier Smith said that basically Deion Sanders had destroyed his confidence and said, you could have run us off with a little bit more compassion. And I don't think that is a big ask. There was somebody else earlier in the story who had said, like, hey, you got 20 guys kind of standing in the hallway, and each guy comes out of the office either angry, upset, or kind of with tears in their eyes. It's not real easy to figure, or it's not real hard to figure out what exactly is going on when you go in that office. And a lot of the players had said, I eventually went to a better situation for me, and it all worked out. And so it's, I don't hold any ill will. But for some guys, for example, Xavier Smith to say it could have been done with a little bit of compassion, I don't think is too much to ask. But then today, after Xavier Smith says, the way he did it, it could have been done with a little bit more compassion, Shedeur Sanders retweets it and says, I don't even remember him, to be honest. Bro had to be very mid at best. So you're kind of proving the dude's point when you're saying, like, hey, you could have done this with a little bit more compassion, or you could have had some empathy to realize, like, hey, this place that you have called home for a little bit is not going to be your home anymore. And I understand that that is a big change. I understand that that's going to be a drastically different situation for you than you might have expected. Instead, it made it sound as if, hey, you're not very good at football, and I'm going to bring in somebody better than you, so appreciate you. We'll be seeing you. And is that difficult to take in? Yeah. And it somewhat leads into the idea that Deion Sanders is only in this for Deion Sanders. Or you could argue Deion Sanders is in this for Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders and Shiloh Sanders. And if that's the case, there's going to be collateral damage. It's just going to be a part of it. But instead of thinking, I just wonder, is completely building your roster through the transfer portal a sustainable model? Are Colorado and Florida State going to be able to keep that up? And part of me thinks it's not going to be an issue, right? Because for so long, everybody built their roster the same way through high school recruiting. It's pretty much the logical way to build a roster, unless you wanted to recruit from JUCOs. Otherwise, you were recruiting 17 and 18-year-old kids. Now, were there some misses every once in a while for premier programs or top programs? Yeah. And did they have a bad recruiting class here or there? Sure. But it's just a little bit different in the transfer portal, trying to continually every year get the best of the best from the transfer portal, or the most experienced, or the most athletic, or whatever the case may be. Because like, if at some point somebody has to recruit the kids from high school, whether it's FCS or group of 5 schools, and then those kids use those programs as feeder programs to the Power 5, and then those Power 5 players become the feeder to the NFL. At some point, somebody has to recruit the 17 and 18-year-olds. So there's going to be an expanded demand for kids from the transfer portal. And so, for instance, Clemson is really hesitant to dabble in the transfer portal. It's just not the way Dabo Swinney wants to operate. That's his prerogative. But if a program like Clemson wants to start dabbling in the transfer portal, does that push Florida State back down a peg in the transfer portal? Does that push Colorado down a peg in the transfer portal? So I wonder if it's a sustainable business model to try to build your team, build your program through that model, because the reasons that you went to the transfer portal was because you were getting beat by bigger and better programs in the high school recruiting game. So you find an alternative route. It's somewhat similar to, you know what, like Army, Navy, and Air Force can't line up and run the ball down your throat via the I formation, wishbone, wing T. And they are not going to recruit better athletes than you are at wide receiver and quarterback, so they can't just go to 5 wide and chuck it around. They have to do something different. I've shared before, I'm a pretty firm believer in that there is generally 1 or 2 programs in each Power 4 conference that just, I think, should consider adopting the flexbone triple option, or adopting a somewhat wacky, you could call it a gimmick, novelty offense. Because like, is Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, Purdue, Indiana, Baylor going to out-recruit the Ohio State, Clemson, Florida State, LSU, Georgia, Floridas of the world? No. It's just never going to happen for you. Even if you start recruiting the transfer portal when those other schools don't, and they do. So you got to do something differently. And I think when everybody is in this copycat mode where, okay, Florida State saw immediate success getting in the transfer portal to an undefeated regular season and winning the ACC. How many other programs go, well, hell, we got to do that too? Or Colorado went from 2 wins to 5 wins. And we'll see what they do in 2024. But they built their entire roster through the transfer portal. It's a somewhat get-rich-quick scheme of we can get some experience, some talent infused in this roster and get an immediate improvement. But when the teams who don't need that immediate influx of talent start to view it as a luxury and start taking it anyway, what does that mean for the B and C tier programs? And once you've put all your eggs in building through that basket, I imagine your recruiting high school infrastructure starts to diminish. Like, you're still obviously going to recruit some kids from high school, but you don't have the staff dedicated to it. You don't have maybe the recruiting budget dedicated to it. And starting from scratch is going to be difficult. So I just wonder how sustainable it is. And I think you're going to get a good idea of it in 2024. How good is Florida State going to be? How good is Colorado going to be? How good are some of these programs that have dedicated themselves to building their rosters through the transfer portal? You're going to get a pretty quick idea of whether or not you can continue to do this year after year after year. And if you can, I think the top dog's coming to copy it. And where does that put you? I don't know. But that's something to watch over the course of the next year or two. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we are pumping out here on Saturday Glory. If you are listening to the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle here on Saturday Glory.